Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. We are in the midst of our series called Coloring Outside the Lines. Which is just going through the book Divine Commodity by Skye Jethani. And right now we're just looking kind of through chapter 5 and just some of the maybe things that just, kind of jump out to us that we really get to kind of address, or what he's looking at in this chapter. So, yeah, we're about to talk about this. You are looking very festive for June with your pineapple shirt.
Thank you.
It's like, yeah, we're recording it. So obviously it's June.
Got a new summer shirt.
And a summer shirt. And summer's on, well, right away anyway. So,
June the 1st.
June the 1st. Oh.
I'm excited.
All right. That's when recording this. You're probably watching this a week after or many years in the distant future.
It's cold and rainy right now, but
yeah, it is. All right. So we are looking at, again, chapter 5. The chapter is called Wind in a Bottle. And so we're kind of just looking at basically how in a way, essentially churches have moved away from what's called a utilitarian purpose. And we'll kind of get into that as we explain this example that Skye leads us off. But the beginning, he uses the ocean liners to set up this example. And, this kind of before there were the airlines, ocean liners, that was how you moved, for mass travel, especially over large bodies of water, like the ocean.
Yeah, if you wanted to get from America to Europe or Africa, you took a boat.
You took a boat, and that was a big thing. And what I actually didn't realize, he really talked about like how there wouldn't necessarily have been, competition for stuff like that. It really, where you were going would dictate which company you were using. So they were specialized on wherever the destination was. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, when we had jets in the air, and all of a sudden what would be a 6-day travel became a 6-hour travel. Basically the ocean liner business slowly, or quite quickly,
I think it quite quickly
dried. It kind of dried up because that, like there was hey, if we can get to where I'm going and in less than a day, that's pretty good. And so what happened then is inventive companies started what we now know as cruise lines.
Sure.
And that whole utilitarian purpose, let me come back to that, of getting people from point A to point B really became about leisure.
Sure.
So yeah, sure, like cruises can stop at a few ports, but really the goal is about what you can do on the boat.
On the boat, yeah.
Like it's just keeping people there. You kind of do even I've not been on a cruise from people tell me quite often when they've been on it, you go to a port, but you're not really spending a long time necessarily at that port. You enjoy some of the things that are there, but you get back onto the boat, and on the boat, they're massive now.
Yeah.
There's movie theaters and shows and
different restaurants
and like
water slides,
pools, and not just a pool, pools, and so there's just so much to do on these boats. And again, it's no longer so much where the boat takes you as much as the enjoyment of just
sure. And they sail around storms, so most of the time you get perfect weather.
It's even better. And so then Skye says basically the idea of this, and he's bringing this analogy to churches. And again, they've kind of lost the utilitarian function, which is the idea of gathering the community and connecting with God. And it really, and as a result of this, the idea of these ocean liners can growing in size. Well, churches became that kind of as well. In that there was a time kind of before, and this is kind of interesting that it's before the 1970s, that there really the whole idea of church transfer, which is kind of something quite normal now, wasn't really a thing.
It didn't exist.
Yeah, it was very little of that. Obviously, if you moved or something like that happened, but this really is something that's more the last 50 years. It wasn't really so much about competition between churches. It was actually much more likely that churches would do things together and would need to for different things. And so in the culture shift, kind of, church going was no longer an expectation. Now, before we say that church culture shift happened like 20 years ago, it happened in the 70s.
Sure.
And I think it's really funny because I hear this a lot. Like this has been an ongoing thing. Is if anyone's unaware, in the church world, is about the declining. People are going to church, and quite often you hear about the people that are really making it stay out of the baby boomers. Well, the problem was, even in the 70s, this was happening, and it was because baby boomers said, you know what, I don't think we don't need to go to church anymore.
Need to go to church anymore. And I think it's true. I think if you look at the historical attendance or people attending church, it peaked between 1950 and 1970, and then from there it's been slowly declining.
Yeah,
and churches have become, like you say, have been gravitating to becoming bigger. There's more mega churches now than there.
Well, that's
have
really
been.
where they started. Was in a lot of responses in that. In kind of the idea that Skye says they're mirroring the passenger, kind of ocean liners, realizing, there's competition, churches realize, hey, but we're competing with, television, movies, music. And then the idea is that the church, you start appealing to the consumer desires. And that means speaking and how you speak, programs, music, anything to sort of, for people who want to find the place that's just right, and one that fits them and fits. They're growing in large families, and so you go there, and there's just something that's right for everyone, and it kind of feels like it becomes, the idea of a Walmart, I guess. There's lots of stores, but you can probably come here.
I can find everything.
You can find everything in one stop,
and that's what's happening in the broader culture.
Yeah.
So consumerism in that particular instance we're discussing here has sort of influenced the church in that way.
Yeah, and a lot of things, the idea of even one-stop shopping. Everything you
so
need to live.
I can send my kids to Christian schools that are associated with this church. Yeah. There's a program for every age during the week. There's sports programs. There's arts programs. I can live my whole life inside a Christian bubble that's associated with my church. Essentially,
that's the whole idea. It's that you can come to church and experience all that the Christian life has to offer and never have to leave the actual church building.
Yeah, exactly. And it's no longer the denomination is not necessarily the determining factor anymore. Like they say, before 1970, it was my parents were of a particular denomination. I grew up in that denomination. If I didn't rebel against that, I became part of that denomination. I take my kids to that denomination, they'll likely grow up and stay. So that was how it always worked. Now it's completely different.
It's very different.
We might transfer churches 3 or 4 times looking for the right church depending on the stage and development of my family.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important. And I do like that Skye kind of mentioned this. So it's not that we're just picking on mega churches.
No, not at all.
The thing is, smaller churches can be also a product of consumerism. It's just a matter of them marketing to a different crowd.
Yeah.
And sometimes the marketing is, we're not them.
Yeah.
Just like, and you just, that whole idea.
Or you become like a boutique hotel. We're not like the big hotel chain. Yeah. We can't really compete with them on a volume or price level, but we're going to compete in a niche level. We do this one thing better than they do, and we market in that because we're not them.
That's right. And so the issue kind of when it comes to church is, or in the institution, it became both the means and the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then what happens is kind of like the broader world, corporations became personalities, and so does the institution of church.
Mm-hmm.
And Skye writes this: there was a time when navigating through life meant managing relationships with real people, the tailor, the doctor, the grocer, the minister. They had names, faces, and personalities.
Mm-hmm.
You liked some and tolerated others.
Yep.
And through this network, you acquired your daily bread.
Sure.
Today, we still depend on a network for survival, but is increasingly populated with corporations, disembodied persons with names, faces, personalities, imprinted through branding on our imagination.
Sure. So I buy my groceries at Sobeys, or I go to the doctor at LifeMark, or those kind of. I watch my movies at Cineplex because I have points there. They've rewarded me with loyalty points, kind of thing. So
that's right.
You're not associating a person anymore. It's a brand.
Yeah, and then when it comes to church, one of the things that we've done, and I mean, I want to be careful that we don't knock this as like, hey, there's been nothing good as a result of some of this stuff. But when it comes to church, it becomes meeting a need through a program, removing the life on life, disciple to disciple messiness that is so present throughout the history of the Christian faith. And again, I don't want to say that I'm not saying that you can't glean anything from programs. You totally can.
Sure.
But there's something so important about the life on life.
Sure. And it doesn't mean life on life and community can't happen in programs.
Yeah.
It's just that that's not
necessarily
necessarily, it's just not necessarily the goal or what they were designed for.
That's right. And kind of it's through the institution of the program that really ends up shepherding each of us in our faith in this. So it becomes, that goal thing, it's not a person shepherding or we shepherding each other. It's really a program.
Sure.
Teaching. Something that's not alive.
So I don't associate myself necessarily with the pastor or the people at a church. I belong to Saddleback Church, or I belong to North Point Church, or I belong to such and such a place in Calgary or Edmonton. That it becomes the church name that I belong to.
That's right. Well, and that just kind of relates to another thing that Skye wrote. He said, we feel affection for, you can insert the church name here, right? And not just for the human beings we know there. We have a relationship with the personified institution that promises to spiritually nurture and feed us. And therefore, our connection becomes less with the flesh and blood people.
Yeah.
And then again, that doesn't mean I think there's bad intention in this. And sometimes the programs are very helpful, but the problem is that they can start to replace true, authentic relationships.
No, you can't. Yeah, and we have come to understand that without relationships, we cannot mature and grow in our faith.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, and it is something we're really learning more and more. Like, I feel like we've always known that, but I feel like we're starting to see, and especially the beauty of be able to science and something that we're learning about, like they've mapped the brain. We're actually seeing like, oh wait, we're really seeing how this actually works.
Neuroscience actually backs it up.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so it kind of brings us to the story of Nicodemus that happens in John chapter 3. Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He's quite a huge leader in that group of people.
A teacher of teachers.
Yeah. And he has interaction with Jesus, and in that kind of there brings up a worldview flaw that Nicodemus has, and it was really present in many religious leaders, many different faiths.
And I think then and now.
Absolutely then and now. And God works in a definitive, and this is what it is, that God works in a definitive and noble manner, that his response to every human condition or action has a predictable, therefore controllable outcome.
So how does that work? Do you follow a process and God's obligated to respond, or
essentially it's be like saying if doing said action, and God will respond after you've done said action in this way. So or it can be the opposite. If you didn't do said action,
that's kind of where I grew up. If you didn't do this, then
you're out. Well, no kidding, you didn't receive that.
Yeah,
and it really, at the end of the day, and there's lots of ways we can look at this, but at the end of the day, it's really about controlling God.
Yeah.
And we do it quite often. It's quite easily. If I live this way, God will do this thing.
Yeah,
and it's really the danger in this is it's actually really hurt a lot of people, and I can say myself too. It's like sometimes when we say the idea of like, oh, I did all this, how come this tragic thing happened?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's more to this, and it's not just again, we're talking about this unpredictable.
Yeah, there's a mystery to go.
Yeah, and that's a scary thing for us.
Yeah.
So the response that Jesus has to Nicodemus is this in verse 8: the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it's going. And essentially, the message is just kind of said. It talks about mystery, unpredictable. Is the thing with this: you can't control God or contain Him.
So what's it about then?
Well, it's really about growing and humbly trusting Him.
Yeah, and I think that's what is. What we're learning about what God really wants from us is not compliance.
Yeah.
God wants a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of mystery in that.
Yeah.
And we are thankful that for Jesus, the Holy Spirit, it helps bring us at least some concreteness to that. And it's just the idea, I think it's the idea of like, hey, it gives us some concreteness. We've got a bit of an image we can kind of see. It helps us a little bit, but it's still mysterious. It's still kind of beyond our scope. I think it's the whole idea of her many times is like we can know what is ultimately unknowable, which it's a dichotomy, if you will. There's a paradox in that. It's just like, hey, yeah, we can know him, but he's ultimately unknowable. There's a tension.
Yeah, and I think that's part of being a follower of Jesus.
It is.
We understand Jesus became a person, but we can't fully know God the Father.
Yeah,
because there's a infinite power to that we can't even really fathom. Something that is all powerful.
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's just so beautifully stated in what we've called the series. It's the coloring outside the lines. Because so much is we want to figure out where the lines are. So it's there. And it's just the idea there's so much when it comes to God that are outside.
We really
lines we
really like to determine the lines.
We really do. And understandably so.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say when it comes to this whole thing, the stumble really is that when you see churches and they're quote unquote successful.
Yeah.
These programs and principles,
it makes me, I want to be successful too.
Absolutely. The success of these certain leaders, it really becomes packaged, whether it's, absolutely in a book, which they tend to do a lot or some of that, or at least in our own heads, it's
or a seminar.
Yep.
A seminar.
Exactly. Like if you do the thing that we did, or I did, it worked for us, therefore it will work for you. And it's a nice, clean package. And again, it comes that whole idea of like, hey, if it's not working for you, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, what's wrong with you? Yeah. You're not doing it right.
You did something wrong and you need to figure that out. And so the other thing that actually even happens is with leaders in churches that are successful, there's a point when sometimes that leader moves on. Whatever that is. Sometimes they retirement, sometimes they just different career, vocation, or death, and people take a look at those principles and package those up in order to sustain, and they figure this package is going to have some guaranteed results. And then we find out those packages do not have guaranteed results.
No, they really don't, because what works for you in your context may or may not, and most of the time does not work in our context, at least not the way it did in yours.
Yeah,
I don't doubt that. I mean, we've even been part of that here at our church, as we've in the past looked at other programs, and they seem to have some impact, but we never quite got the impact that it had on the original originator of the thinking or program.
That's right. And actually, in this whole thing, Dallas Willard, he kind of challenges the thinking, especially when it comes to some of these leaders. Instead of like focusing on reproducing the methodology, does ever, that whole idea is maybe the focus needs to be on their devotion and intense love for Jesus.
That's really hard to measure.
That's hard to measure. And with that's kind of the whole idea of, we say, the point.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee of quote unquote, what we'll say is successful, but like all of a sudden your church is, thousands and thousands of people and on millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that, but like that's kind of why are we not looking at that aspect when it comes to a leader? And then Skye writes, institutions, despite the personhood ascribed to them in our imaginations, are not capable of love.
Yeah, institutions cannot love you.
They can't.
Only people can love you.
And that's just the thing. Love is a person-to-person thing.
Yeah.
We need to feel love and attachment to others and to God. And what happens is that we become attached to methodology. And the methodology, even if it's good, and we're not going to sit there and say like somehow the methodology, that's bad. We're saying it's incapable of doing the thing that we really need the most, the thing that we as humanity want, the thing that God's desire, and that is to be in communion with God and with each other. And that's the stumble, right? Like, is that attachment love comes as a result of people in true and authentic community with other people.
And it can even look like success. I could have lots of people attending and be raising millions of dollars, and according to this principle or ideal, I still wouldn't be a success.
That's right. And completely
missed the point.
All that's important too.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think the challenge is,
okay, we need some hope here. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Well, I think this is the idea is that the point is truly is community. And we really need to start, use our imaginations as to what that can look like.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that there isn't some great things that could be modeled that we can see out there before that. You just got to, I think we got to see the idea of just because it worked there, doesn't mean it's going to work here. Doesn't mean that it's a general principle. It's the idea of like, hey, we need to use our imaginations in this. And using the kind of the ocean liner analogy, we can enjoy the cruise, but the point still needs to be the destination.
Sure. And that's eventually, the boat still is taking someone from A to B.
That's right.
And our cruise liners don't work like that. They drop you off and pick you up at the same port, and it's all about the boat. But I think from the church's perspective, it's still about cultivating a relationship with God and other people.
Well, and I think that's what, if you go with the idea of the programs and all that in the church, they can be really good, all that sort of stuff, but it could be like maybe the point isn't the program. The point is we use the program with the idea of relationship and community starting, and it's a byproduct. Oh, there was something kind of neat that we learned and got out of that. I think sometimes it's the other way. It's like the program is like, oh, there's a byproduct of a relationship.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, maybe that needs to be what we want.
Yeah, exactly.
And then if it just so happens we enjoyed ourselves while doing it, listened to good music, learned a practical tool in everyday life that could be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a byproduct.
And I think the challenge that Skye gives in the book is that it means that we really have to sort of relearn the lost art of being friends.
Yeah. And that really what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
And I love this last quote, and we'll end it here with this quote. Skye said, let's break free from the artificial relationships with unfeeling, uncaring, unloving institutions that cannot contain the unpredictable wind of God's Spirit, and focus instead on building soulish connections with real people filled with the breath of God.
I like that. Good way to end. So thanks very much for joining us today as we talk about consumerism and how it may have influenced the church and the things that we can do about it. And again, as we've been learning today, the church has gravitated towards being more consumer oriented in offering of its programs and becoming an identity as an institution. And we've kind of lost the art of really connecting with people. And so we maybe need to relearn that. And that's how we use our imagination to color out the lines of what we actually have been doing. So as always, we'd really like to hear your comments on this issue, what it means for you, what it means for you in your context. If you have some ideas of things that maybe have worked for you and things that you've learned along the way. Obviously, we're sharing what we've learned. We'd love to hear maybe what you've learned. So if you're part of our church community, we suggest that as you meet with your groups during the week, that you discuss this issue with them, and maybe we can have a broader discussion how it impacts our whole church. So thanks again for watching, and please like and subscribe so we can bring more of this great content for you.